Okay. Um, so yeah, I'll just give a little bit of background. I'm also a landscape architect. I work at Parallax team. So we are a small BIM consultancy, with the rest of us being architects. I lead the landscape side of things. But I've been working in Revit and sites and landscapes for about 10 years now. Worked at a couple of firms. Um, and so I've been at Parallax now for 2 years, and I've essentially been kind of building out our landscape side. So we do kind of like a little bit of everything. We do building project templates, content libraries, training and implementation, project modeling. And then we also build out landscape apps as well. So I'm going to be focusing on FOREground here. But I thought I'd just give a little bit more background and pull up an old project to look at first before we kind of get into the live demo. I saw there was a kind of question there. So this is an old project of mine that's actually currently under construction. It's the Washington State Convention Center here in Seattle. This is just kind of an example of a big urban project. And I only have the landscape turned on, so it looks a little funny. But you can see kind of what a landscape and Revit starts to look like. And then this is kind of a good example of a big urban project that's composed almost entirely of floors. And this is kind of the approach and something I'll be talking about in FOREground as well. But when you're working with uh, when you're working on an urban project in particular, but also like when you're working with like real thicknesses of paving and hardscape, topography isn't always super useful. So we often find ourselves using a lot of the architectural tools, and a lot of that tends to be floors. So you can see this landscape is composed. We have like wood decks, we have stone, we have concrete. A lot of that is floors and walls and planting. So yeah, you can start to see what that looks like. And this is a pretty massive project. It's a big kind of super block. So you can see it kind of wraps around here. We have some stuff on structure up here. It looks like it's floating because the architecture is turned off. But yeah, that
It's very
is,
cool and very cool to see a project that's actually being built.
yeah, so it's currently being built right now. Yeah, so this was at GGN. I'm no longer at GGN, but it's a kind of a good example of not an NDA project. So many of the projects we work on, we can't like share what they look like, but that is one of them. So I'm going to flip back over here and kind of show off what FOREground can do. Yeah, this is 2018. So we're going to speed forward into the present and hop into Revit 23 over here. So this is our FOREground ribbon. And this is a tool set that kind of I spent the first year at Parallax kind of building up. And so this is built on all of my knowledge of working in Revit for like 10 years. And it kind of started
Beautiful
out.
thumbnails.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I've I've kind of made everything here myself with a little bit of help from John Pearson. If anyone knows Parallax or John Pearson, he's kind of our brains behind our app development here at Parallax. So he kind of helped get this all started and off the ground. But I've been running with it for over a year and a half now. And so yeah, it's built on originally kind of just out of the box Revit, and then from there we built it out initially with Dynamo. We kind of prototyped a lot of it, and now it is a full app in C#. So just I'll kind of highlight the different tool sets we have here. We have a few topography tools. Like I said, our main focus is on floor and slab editing, because we found that is really what the bread and butter of a landscape and Revit is. You want to be working with floors because floors have actual thickness. You can actually grade them. And so I'll be demonstrating kind of a lot of these more powerful tools. We have some quick big hardscape tools. They essentially let you generate wall stairs, curbs as railings by just like picking edges. And then we have some planting placement tools. I'll also kind of show how those work as well. But in general, planting in Revit, like you can do it out of the box. It does like Revit does some things out of the box well, like it does schedules pretty well. But what we are trying to do with FOREground is we're trying to augment this is kind of the stuff that's a little bit harder. So like plant mixes, placing, tagging, and updating those plants. We're trying to basically help automate all the stuff. So that's essentially, that is kind of the summary of FOREground of what we're trying to do. Is like Revit does so much stuff good already, and like out of the box it can do a lot of this stuff, but we're trying to automate it and just make it much faster and easier for you to do it. And then we have a few other annotation helper tools as well. So I will jump right in. I'm trying to, let's see. I always lose my chat. There it is. Okay, so I'll just hop right in and jump into the floor slab editing tools. So the first one here is drape slabs. So I believe we did have a question about that earlier as far as draping floors to match topography. So that's what you can do with drape. Drape actually lets you pick floors, roof, or topography as a host. We're going to start off with topography and then I'll show floors. So you can pick a bunch of slabs. I'm just going to grab all these. So I went ahead, these are all kind of just flat floors that I went ahead and made in this sample file. And then we're going to drape them on the topography. So you can also grab hosts from a link. I'm not doing that right now. And then by default, it's going to try to grab a topography host for you, but then you can change that host if it doesn't kind of select correctly. But you can see it's grabbing that topography, which is the one I want. And then we have a number of calculation methods for getting exterior and interior points. So if I flip just to boundary points, you'll see that it's just going to highlight kind of the bare minimum I need to shape edit all of those floors up to the topography. The intersecting contours is sort of my favorite method. And you can see it basically finds where all those slabs intersect the contour lines and it gets those points as well. And then you can also do just a specified interval. So that's a 5-foot interval. That throws a lot of points in there. So I tend to not work with that, but you can if that's what you're trying to do. And then you can also get interior points. The first option is none. You can get all of the interior points within the slab. So then it's going to go ahead and grab all the interior points. And then you can also put an interval along the contour lines if you want more points again. And then we have a couple other options down here. So I'll just go ahead and hit none. That'll reduce our runtime. You could have options to reset the slab, option if you want to enable a point offset. So if I uncheck that, it's going to be 0. Otherwise, it's going to default to the thickness of the floor. In this case, we have multiple floors, so it's going to default to the smallest thickness of the floor. So I'll go ahead and run that, and then we'll see those all will offset a little bit above topography.
Really elegant interface.
Yeah, and what we are trying to do also with kind of all of our tools, and you'll see that, is we try to give you like an initial preview so before you run stuff, so you can kind of see what you're going to get before you run. That way you can reduce the amount of iterations you have to run through. So that is, yeah, I just went ahead and did all of those. So I'm going to go over here and take a look at another one of these, and we're going to redrape. I'm just going to show how you can drape onto other slabs. So this is particularly helpful if you're working on a structure, if you're working with multiple slabs, you're hosting on top of like a roof slabs. So I'm going to change the host to this slab. And where you can start to do is you can either start to offset up or you can start to offset down. I'm going to offset this one up. So if you have like planting soil, that's what this is. You can offset those on top of roof slabs that are existing, or sometimes you have soil that's like below a paving surface that you want to host it directly and have it follow perfectly. If you have big soil cells, or if you have different situations on structure where you're going to have soil below paving, you can do the same thing and you can offset it down. So yeah, that's how that works. So drape is kind of like, that's a big starting point. If you have either a big topography surface that you want to follow that's from civil, or if you're doing all sorts of complicated things on structure, it can be really useful too. All right, I'm going to zoom back here so you
Very
can see.
nice and very useful in so many applications. So yeah. Quick too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the benefit. Like you can do a lot of the stuff with Dynamo, but this is all in C# and C#.
Well, and I see that Nick had mentioned that in the chat, that there's a Dynamo plugin that can do that. And I bet you were the one that created it. Like dark BIM, or at least one of the ones who created the Dynamo workflows for it, because I
Yeah.
remember seeing your workflows at one of the main conferences. So
Yeah, and so that's how a lot of this stuff started out. And you can do a lot of this stuff with Dynamo. Like when you start, some of the stuff gets really complicated in Dynamo, but some of the stuff is relatively simple. But even like the difference between like like running this in Dynamo, it could like sit here and churn and churn and churn for like
it's processing so much information.
yeah, that is one thing that we always like talk through with our landscape clients when they're starting in like Revit implementation is site modeling is like really intensive, and having it be in an app and held in C# it does make it so much faster. So yeah, that is one thing to keep in mind. So moving along on our slab editing tools, some of the other powerful ones we have here, which will let you kind of do a little bit more fine-tuned grading here in Revit. So we have grade edges. Yeah, we are focused primarily in Revit. There's a question in the chat about that. So grade essentially lets you grade edges, and we have a few different methods. You can basically specify a slope of a single set of edges. You can adjust the slope, essentially like push and pull edges up and down. Or my favorite method is basically adjust and slope, which you can do this in a lot of different combinations. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate how this can work. So
Well, it looks also, there's a question in terms of how the topo was created. It's, kind of that same idea in terms of garbage in, garbage out, right? You want to start with a good topo surface first with the good points that you need, hopefully minimized, and you're not grabbing a point every centimeter.
Right. Yeah, it is true. It doesn't matter how the topo is made. And the thing about, and with newer versions of Revit, I forget what you can link in a topography if you have a 360 directly from Civil 3D, and you can use a true Civil 3D surface to do that drape, which will improve your accuracy definitely.
Which is great, especially for firms like mine at Smith Group, where we have a landscape department internally.
Yeah, definitely. And so yeah, we do that, and we've done that with some of our clients as well, that they want to be able to get that better surface. So what I'm doing here, and what I can do with basically this method, is I can use this grade adjust and slope to basically like smooth out some of these areas where I might not necessarily want to have all this kind of choppy grading. And essentially what I can do is I picked an edge that I actually want to just keep at 0. So I use that edge as essentially my control. And then I pick the edges that I want to slope, which are these 2 sets of side edges. And I can essentially say, I can uncheck the specify slope, and it's basically just going to connect those edges so that I can make that one continuous slope. So I'm going to go ahead and run that, and you'll see basically it smooths it out along that edge. So I can throw a quick spot slope on there, and you'll see like this edge is now all consistent at 9.8, and this other edge still pretty steep, but it shows you kind of what the power of grade edges can do. And then you can do something similar, but you can do it like in the cross slope direction as well. So if I hop over here, yep, there's a question. So that's what I was just going to show next. So you can do the same thing. So if I know like I want to keep this edge as my control and I want to move this edge, what I'm going to do is I'm going to essentially, I'm going to tell it I'm going to adjust this edge, but I'm going to say I'm adjusting it to 0. So essentially I'm not adjusting it. And then I can pick all these cross slopes here. And then I can tell it that I want those cross slopes to be that 1.5, or if actually I want that to be a negative 1.5, you'll see it adjusts those points accordingly. And then I'll run that. 1.5 is a common cross slope. It's hard to see it, but yeah, now you'll see that all those edges are now 1.5%. So essentially grade edges allows you to do grading in Revit, and you can specify slopes and lots of different combinations. But essentially like our slab tools are kind of all meant to be used together and in lots of different combinations. So sometimes you have to kind of think through like, what are you starting with? What's your end goal? And like, how do you get there? Align edges is another tool that we have in the toolbox as well. So what you can do, and again, similar to grade, it has a few different options. You can align to slabs, you can align to edges. It has an align and slope option as well. So I'm just going to quick align this one up over here. And you can use these in lots of different combinations also. So I'm going to quick just bring this edge up so it aligns to this slab. And then you can see this one's kind of all out of plane. And this is common if you're working on urban sites, you have a lot of like paving edges that are meeting. We don't have programs for landings and runs at this point. That is something that we have clients ask about. And yeah, so we do look at like incorporating new features as we're kind of able and as it's feasible. Let's see, I'm gonna pick these slabs to align that guy too. And then you'll see, so it basically, it tells you found 2 adjacent slabs, it found 4 points, and it's basically going to bring these 4 points up along the edge. So now it's all happily and plain. There we go. All right. And then we have a few other, you can split and merge shape edited slabs. I'm going to show off fixed points. So when you're working, actually, let me do it, explode too. So yeah, we have a few different helpers. You can adjust points, you can adjust area. Essentially that lets you like raise and lower either an isolated area or like a whole slab altogether. And then we also have fixed points as a helper I'm going to show off. And then we also have explode, which oftentimes, like I have an example here where you have like a slab that has multiple loops. It's sometimes that happens initially and then you don't want it to be like that later. So I can explode these. And then it's going to basically split those off into 2 separate slabs. Then the other thing I wanted to show, so oftentimes when you're working with shape edited slabs, if you go to like edit a boundary and you add or even remove segments, you can start to have problems with your points. So we have rough in another segment of this floor. So yeah, you'll see what happens there is essentially you drop all those points because we're working from sea level. And that's often how we'll work as landscape architects. So fixed points is sort of a quick helper that we have. Oh, shoot, that one isn't, I swear I tested this one earlier. There's a couple bugs that we're still working
out. It's the beauty of a live demo.
I know, it's true. Maybe I did it earlier. I know it works sometimes. But essentially what fixed points tries to do is it interpolates points back up. Let me try it on this one.
But all of these tools seems like it takes it from, actually just following the topo to following code, right? Like it's making it real.
Yeah. And so oftentimes, yeah, a landscape architect wants to be, sometimes civil is doing all the grading and you're just following civil, in which case drape is fine. But oftentimes you're doing like actual live design and Revit. So let's see if I can run fix on this guy. Yeah, there it goes.
There we go.
So yeah, what essentially fix is trying to do is it's trying to find points that are like way out of range, and basically it reinterpolates and brings them back up as like just essentially like a best guess.
But at the very least, if it doesn't work, you could probably just reset and then reapply
yeah,
the topo
you can do a
surface.
redrape also. The issue with redrape is if you've done like other things like you aligned or graded, like you might not want to like entirely reset your surface, which is why we have fix as like kind of a helper for that. But it's still a best guess, so you would probably still need to come back and like regrade it. Okay, and yeah, there's Aaron's over there answering questions in the chat. Okay, so yeah, we have some quick pick tools, and maybe we'll come back if we have some time to show how those work. But I wanted to quick go through some planting tools. So yeah, we do have our own planting library and like tools that go with that planting library, and that's separate from FOREground. But essentially what what we ship in FOREground is we are trying to fix kind of some of the basic problems with Revit, as I mentioned. So um, they focus on plant mixes, basically placing plants more easily, being able to update and tag and sort of group and associate those plants more easily as well. So let me toggle over to my planting views and we'll take a look at what that looks like. And so the beauty with our planting tools is, yeah, if you have plant content that you already have in your firm that you want to use, you're free to use any planting content that you want to use. Yeah, like I said, we do have our own libraries that some of our clients prefer to use. So a quick go into this plant mixes dialog. So the way the mixes work is essentially you can define mixes from plants that are already loaded in the project. So you can see I have some mixes here. So this is basically grass and shrub mix. It has a name, it has a spacing, and it has like 3 different types, each with like a percentage associated to it. And then yeah, you can update them from here as well. So if I flip over to this grass mix, yeah, I can say, actually, I want this to be a 50-50 mix. I can update that mix. And now my grass mix has been updated from here as well. And then, yeah, so that's kind of the first base layer of our planting tools. And then from there, you can use those mixes that you make in the placement tools. So the first one is fill area, which lets you fill areas, and an area is either like room, an area, or a floor, essentially, and you can fill those areas. So you can use a single type. You don't have to use the mixes, but then the mixes will appear here in a drop down. So I can grab like my grass and shrub mix. You can do multiple areas. So I can come down here and I can like do like 3 or 4 of them at once. And then what you can see what it does is it does a few things similar to what our drape tool does. It tries to find a host for you. It defaults to a topography, but you can also change it to a floor host. And then the triangular spacing is the default spacing. If I uncheck that, you'll see it changes to a grid spacing. And then there's also a wiggle, which basically like creates a random threshold. So if I like up this to 1, you'll start to see basically the XY is going to be randomized within a 1 foot range. If I make that smaller, it becomes like a little bit tighter. Or if I set that back to 0, you'll see that perfect grid. And then you can also change the direction. So if I want, these are all going to have to be together, but essentially I can change the direction so that they're all oriented along that edge. And then I can run that and it's going to fill all of those areas with that plant mix. And then sort of the third layer that we're doing is after the plants are placed, we create an association of the plants. So if I grab one of these plants, you'll see my properties palette. We push a few shared parameters in to help us keep track of the plants for you. So we assign all like groupings, what we call, it's not a true Revit group, we call it a group, but it's essentially like a grouping, and we're keeping track of a database on the back end. And it also will put that mix in there, so you can schedule that out. It's a shared parameter that will appear in your schedule. So if you want to sort all your scheduled by the mix, you can do that. So yeah, you can see this one is 01, this one is 05, and that's 06. And so the nice thing about that is now you can either tag them all. So I can do a quick tag all, and it's going to tag all of my plant groupings. We also have a linear, so you can place them along lines, or if you have plants already placed, like oftentimes trees, you're going to place those manually anyway, you can come back and create a manual association, and then you can still use the tag all and the update tools. But when you do tag all, basically it's going to find every type within the grouping, it's going to place a tag. And then the nice thing is then we can update those stuff. So what we can do is we can move these tags apart. So by default, like I have some settings that they're all going to pull from like this upper right corner, but I can kind of pull these apart so that when I update, they don't like all stay smashed together. So I'm gonna move this one around a little bit so we can see that. And then I'm gonna run an update so we can see what happens. And then now in 23, also you'll see in all previous versions of 23, we were you were managing this group count with a shared parameter that we were basically pushing in there. But now with 23, there's multi-leader hosting it basically supports nice clean hosting, so you can see we're supporting that fully natively. So that is one thing with FOREground, where we try to support kind of everything native Revit out of the box, like how you would expect it to be, as much as we can, because that's something that's important to us at Parallax, and we use these tools ourselves. So we want kind of everything to work as well as it can. So I'll do another quick
Well, and
cleanup
since you
over here.
referenced 23, I was just looking because Aaron had answered the question about the interior edges in visibility graphics. In 23, it doesn't look like that's an option. It looks like there's folding lines. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
they've renamed. They've done some.
Why wouldn't they?
What?
Because why wouldn't they? Of course they did.
Yeah, so they basically added 2 subcategories so that you have the option to basically
they've broken it apart, so you
they've
have
broken
more
it apart so
control.
that you have more control, essentially. So yeah, but yeah, they did rename it. So yeah, I'm not sure.
I will paste that in the mural so that everybody can see the difference between 22 and 23, because that is a subcategory difference that, as you can see from Lauren's graphics, she's turning off some of those interior edges in her plans and making them nice and pretty. But yes, absolutely. I can see that the plant mixes is definitely something that here at Smith Group we use quite a bit. So that would save a tremendous amount of time.
Yeah. So the kind of the final piece is like is the updating that we do with this, so that I can like resize this area. And this is one of the reasons actually we use rooms or areas, is it makes it easier. If you have a floor, that's great, but then when you have adjacent floors, you suddenly have to like edit multiple adjacent boundaries. With rooms or areas, you can just like start dragging these, and those rooms or areas will just kind of update and refill. Occasionally, yeah, you'll get stuff, well, you have to move them around a little bit. But then I'll do a quick update all, and what it's going to do is it's going to look for, it's going to kind of toggle through them all and find the ones that have changed significantly within a pretty small threshold. And then it's going to replace all those plants. And you'll see basically what it does is it does like delete and replace all those plants, but it remembers where all those tags are, and then it replaces those tags in a pretty non-destructive way, like because it is a mix and there it is a little bit of randomness, like things will move around a little bit, but you'll see like all the tags remained where they were. So that's something that, yeah, we kind of work hard to make it as user friendly as possible.